Welcome again to another video dedicated to the history of Peru. Today, we are going to have the chance of learning about the history of the most terrible epidemics of this country. And well, the intention of this video is to inform you about the most famous diseases and the most terrible periods of the history of this nation connected to those diseases that actually some of them we know were present here before the coming of the conquistadors, of the Spaniards, because most of the time we connect the diseases with the arrival of the conquistadors, but of course before their arrival there were also diseases in this territory. So first, before we start with this interesting information we have, I would like to give you a clear idea about what is the difference between an endemic, an epidemic, and a pandemic. Nowadays, we are living a world pandemic, right? Pandemic is related, with a disease that is spread around the world, that is affecting the entire humanity. And in our history, we had some pandemics. But let's also start with the endemic diseases. And the endemic diseases are, as here the explanation mentions, are diseases that exist in different parts of the world that are usually connected to a specific population or region, and that usually do not go out of that region or that population. These are also diseases that periodically they appear and disappear. And for example, in Peru, we have several endemic diseases that are constantly appearing and disappearing in the jungle of Peru, especially. We have also the epidemics, and these epidemics are these diseases that affect a larger space or demographic area, or could be sometimes a country or two countries that are connected by borders. And these epidemics also have been markers of sometimes the fall down of societies. In this case, for example, the Incan society was terribly affected by epidemics during the time of the contact between the Europeans and the natives. And well, of course, you know already what is a pandemic, which is more global. So when we talk about the diseases in the history of Peru and the history of every nation, we have to go, of course, back in time in order. And in the case of Peru in particular, we have enough documentation, material, information to have an idea about how was the situation of, for example, the diseases, the health of the people before the contact with the European people. So now we're going to start with the pre-Hispanic period of our history. And what we had before the contact with the Spaniards, of course, several diseases, which most of them became, let's say, like endemics of certain areas, or possibly also epidemics at some point. We are not very sure, of course, in terms of the exact extent of these cases, these breakouts of diseases, but we have interesting information that archaeologists have been able to gather from potteries, for example. In this case, we can see two potteries in which we have the, let's say, the clear elements that are linking, let's say, these individuals with a disease called the Leishmaniasis. So the Leishmaniasis, which is also known here in Peru as the UTA, that's the native name of this disease, is a disease that still exists here in Peru, by the way. In the center, you can see a picture of a person that has the marks of this disease. So, well, the vector or the let's say the animal that spreads this disease. It's a mosquito, as you can see, and inside the mosquito there is a parasite that is also called the Leishmania. So this parasite and the mosquitoes also live in warm territories, in warm areas, and this disease, by the way, still is present in Peru. But we know from the vessels from different museums, pre-Hispanic museums in the country, that the disease that we call the UTA also here what had affected different locations in the country. And notice, for example, in the case of the picture, an individual that has a complete damage in the zone of the nose, and the disappearance basically of the tip of the nose and part of the upper lip. So what happens when the mosquito like leaves this parasite in your body, usually the zone where the parasite gets in, it gets immediately like swollen, there is pus in it, and eventually there is a wound that is very difficult to be treated. Nowadays, it can be treated, of course, but the wounds sometimes are so deep that it's impossible to find any regeneration. There's no way to regenerate that zone. Of course, that picture is from the beginnings of the 20th century. Nowadays, there are not cases that bad commonly seen, but this is the situation when a person leaves these parasites to live in their skin for long time. So notice also that we have in the vessel that is next to the picture, the same element also, the nose completely eaten by this parasite. And sometimes I remember some, let's say people, some archaeologists initially who had no idea about what these vessels were representing. They thought that this was the representation of a dead or a mummy, right? Because of the lack of the nose, right? But eventually the specialists, and this is the importance also of connect not just archaeology, with, let's say, disciplines that are connected to the archaeology directly, also with other disciplines, like for example, doctors, in this case, to understand more deeply what is represented in the vessel. So we will continue here. This is also a little bit more information about the UTA, these wounds that are caused by this parasite. As I was saying, usually this, let's say the bite of the mosquito happens in exposed areas. It could be the face, hands, and feet. So next case of pre-Hispanic disease that we know attacked also indigenous people of this territory was the so-called verruga peruana, or Peruvian wart. Also is known as the Carrion Disease. So this disease is not unique to the Peruvian territory. It also has been also, let's say, endemic of regions like Ecuador, for example, and is a disease that usually is connected with the high elevation. So we have a complete different, let's say, reality, of the virus or the parasite in comparison to the other one we saw. So in the case of the verruga peruana, for example, we have also different examples, modern examples of this disease, which has not been completely eradicated. Notice, please, for example, this is the wart, or the way how we see it, like a wart. So these wounds that you can see that are appearing also in exposed zones, it has to be always in exposed zones where the mosquito will bite you. notice also here in this vessel, this is a pre-Hispanic vessel from the Mochica culture. We can still, of course, see the same wounds, the same, let's say, little balls that are appearing in the zones where the individual got the bite of the mosquito, and the parasite penetrated also. So this disease affected also the pre-Hispanic people. We have this information from the vessels, especially from the potteries, and also from tombs, from the pre-Hispanic tombs. So there must be something must have been very impressive for the pre-Hispanic people, seeing these diseases this close, for them to perpetuate them in potteries in these vessels. So in both cases also, these diseases still are endemic diseases of this territory. So they haven't completely been eradicated. So we have also other examples of pre-Hispanic art in which we can see what we call pustulas, or these little like balls that are appearing in the zones where the mosquitoes had been biting. And here a picture from the beginnings of the 20th century of a man affected by this disease. By the way, briefly later, we're going to see again this disease reappearing in the history of Peru later on in the 19th century. But you can see also again the similarity between this case, for example, and the previous representations in vessels. And well, we have now the time of the conquest, the period of the Spanish presence in this territory. So basically the pre-Hispanic conquest, the pre-Hispanic times of the history of Peru were also times of expansion. The Incas also were conquistadors themselves, and that's why they were exposed to these diseases. They were exposed to by going to the jungle, catching diseases that were endemic from those territories, or going up north in the Andes. The same, they were able to be exposed to diseases that were not, let's say, typical to the zones where they used to live. When the conquistadors came to this territory here in Peru, it was the year 1532, but up in Central America, in the Caribbean, it was the last decade of the 15th century. So the Spaniards introduced diseases, of course. There is a big debate about how let's say, intentional sometimes these diseases, were, let's say, were penetrated into this territory. Was there any intention of the Spaniards to introduce these diseases at some point? Most people say, no, of course, no, they were not really thinking about it. But there are some evidences in which at least the point of view of the Spaniards was that the diseases that they were not killing them, but were killing the indigenous, were an expression that God, was the good hand of God that was sweeping away multitudes to make room for them here in the New World. It was sort of like a way of legitimizing, their presence through this protection from God and the Virgin. Okay, so here we have, of course, the presence of the famous Christopher Columbus, and the time of the arrival of the Spaniards was also equivalent to the time of the arrival of different diseases, since a simple flu to the terrible measles, and of course the smallpox. So we're going to be talking about some of them today. So, by the way, possibly the disease that has the most coverage, the disease that has the most, let's say, sort of like there's more information about it, is the smallpox. And the smallpox destroyed entire communities, let's say, sweep away indeed entire communities in the islands of the Caribbean, for example, in the territories that belong to the Aztecs, and of course here in Peru. Some interesting facts about the smallpox. First of all, there was zero immunity, of course, here by the indigenous. So this disease was very aggressive, very aggressive. And another very curious thing is that the indigenous in these territories liked to bath a lot. We used to take like prolonged like baths in the river. We were very, very clean people in the pre-Hispanic times versus my European ancestors, the Spanish European ancestors we had, that when they came, they had a tradition of not bathing very often. No, it is really interesting to see, and this is what especially say nowadays, that the tradition of the indigenous of bathing, all the time, cleaning themselves all the time, improved in a bad way the effects of the diseases such as the smallpox. It made the smallpox to be infected quite often at some point. They were trying to clean from their skins all of this strange disease that was appearing, and they were unfortunately, like make them be more infected. So this is the sad truth. The Spaniards believed also that this indigenous dying in front of them, which were millions that were dying in front of them of this terrible disease, was the Virgin Mary and Jesus that were helping them, because otherwise it would be impossible that just a few, Spaniards, a few handfuls of Spaniards would be able to destroy entire societies. So, well, another thing which is very interesting, let me tell you, is about, and this is related with the Incas, with the Inca leaders. So Huayna Capac was the 12th Inca of our history. Wow. At least this is what we, let's say, take for sure, no? That Huayna Capac was the 12th Inca of our history. And Huayna Capac was the father of Atahualpa and Huáscar. But Atahualpa and Huáscar, the 13th and 14th Inca of our history, the last Incas, let's say, free Incas of our history, were not neither one or the other the legitimate heirs of the crown or the Mascay Pacha of the Incas. Actually, the person that was supposed to be the true, the righteous, let's say, inheritor of this crown was another person called Ninan Cuyuchi or Ninan Cuyochi. That was supposed to be the heir of the Inca crown. The sad part also is that even before the Spaniards came to Peru, came to this territory, put their feet in Incan territory, the smallpox arrived. This is a true fact. Actually, a couple of years before the Spaniards came, it is not very clear, but seems that in between the year 15, could be 25 or 26, even some say 27, the Inca king, Huayna Capac, got smallpox. He got infected from this disease, and he died from this disease. So when he was very ill, his son, Ninan Cuyuchi, was not yet sick. He started to feel sick, and he decided that Ninan Cuyuchi would be the heir. As I was saying, so Ninan Cuyuchi, the true heir, unfortunately died also from this disease. He died from smallpox, and we had no heir. So that's why we had the civil war between Atahualpa and Huáscar. What a terrible thing. Also connected with this disease. So once again, here the representation of this Virgin Mary that is like sending this disease to the indigenous and killing this indigenous to make room for the Spaniards here in this territory. So, and then we are in the next period of our history. And by the way, the conquest period was, let's say, not so long. It lasted about 25 years. And after that, we had the first viceroys all coming to this territory. Because before the viceroyalty period, during the conquest time, that short time, the leaders of this territory were the conquistadors. And the most important one was Francisco Pizarro, right? The creator of the city of Lima, the creator, let's say, of the Spanish, let's say, presence in this territory. So during that short period of time, like the years of the conquest and the period, the early period of the viceroyalty, there were lots of people killed by diseases. But how many? It is very hard to know exactly, but some specialists say that in Peru, in the Incan territory, we had, before the coming of the conquistadors and their diseases, about 12 million people, 12 million people, right? And at the end of the 16th century, we had about 900,000 indigenous. So imagine the terrible drop of population due to these diseases. So what a terrible thing. What a deep wound in the souls of the indigenous. So, well, during the, let's say, viceroyalty time, and actually we're talking about the more advanced period of the viceroyalty. We're talking about the period of the 19th century, especially early 20s, 18th century, early 19th century. We have also the fight. We continue with the fight against the smallpox. And there's a really curious case here. So it was King Charles IV of Spain. He was ruling Spain. And during that period, the vaccine against the smallpox was a reality in Europe. People were starting to be vaccinated in Europe. It was a very curious way how the person who discovered this vaccine, he discovered in a very curious way. Edward Jenner, here you see his name. And he discovered this vaccine after observing that there was a disease that the cows got that was very, very similar to the smallpox. It was the cow's pox, which was not so bad with humans once the humans got this disease. And he noticed this in the people who had cows, who milked the cows, that sometimes they got, these little like wombs, these pox. But then after, they were not affected by the smallpox, right? So they got immune from the smallpox. From observation, he noticed this. So he became, let's say, he thought that it could be a good idea to inoculate this pus from the cowpox into a child. So this is the way how he got to find the vaccine. So, and well, the vaccine was created, right? So wonderful, hooray, right? But now, well, in Spain, it was necessary to send this vaccine also to the American territories because, people were dying and dying here in the Americas, and Spain had more population in the Americas actually than in the very peninsula, in very, territory of Spain. So they needed to save these lives. And this is why an expedition called the Baldness Expedition. Baldness was a doctor, a Spanish doctor, who organized this expedition to bring the vaccine to the New World, to America, to America. And but it was a very difficult thing to do because the trips in the ships used to take a long period of time, and this vaccine only could live without refrigeration for a space of 10 days approximately. So how come they would be able to bring this vaccine to America? So, well, this doctor organized a group of orphans, as children that were orphans, and there were 22 orphans who were sent with him across the sea, across the Atlantic, to America. So what was their idea, right? So, well, his plan was inoculating the vaccine into the arm of these children, also, well, producing, the antibodies to fight the disease, right? And these children will be sort of like recipients of the vaccine. And these children will have this vaccine for a period of days, right? A period of days until, this will be reabsorbed. So this, let's say, disease will be here in the arm of the child until, the time when it was, needed to pass it to the next arm of the next child and inoculating the disease. So you were vaccinating the child, and as well you were maintaining alive, the vaccine. So this is the brazo a brazo, arm to arm, let's say, a system used by this doctor. And this is how this vaccine arrived to America, arrived to Venezuela, Ecuador, Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, Chile, Argentina, and it spread over also even to Mexico, to all the territories that belong to the Spanish king. So, well, and of course, this was a big, time in the history of the world. And the smallpox, by the way, is the only disease that has been completely eradicated thanks to the vaccine. But it still exists a smallpox, let's say, in some, let's say, laboratories. Also, there's always a possibility that this disease comes again. Right? Because it's not completely eradicated. I mean, we have it still existing in laboratories. So, and now we are in the Republican period of the history of Peru, times also of big changes, times of the independence. And here we have the independentist group. We have the Argentinian hero, José de San Martín, there in front of this group of liberators of this nation, of soldiers. And during the times of the fight for the independence, also diseases were there everywhere. And there were some diseases that caused more trouble to the soldiers. Not just the independentist ones, also the royalist ones, the ones that were supporting, the viceroyalty. For example, one of those diseases was what we call the paludismo, or the malaria. The malaria, which the independentist groups, the independent soldiers, catch when they were in the coast of Peru, when they were marching, along the coast of Peru in direction to Lima. They catch this disease in swamps, because along the coast of Peru, now we don't have anymore as many swamps as we used to have in the coast, because now this territory has been adapted to the city. We are growing, we are expanding. So the swamps had been destroyed. But back in that time, in the 19th century, there used to be many of them. And in those swamps is where the mosquitoes that are the transmitters of this disease, of the malaria, lived. So this is how many of these soldiers, including Jose de San Martin, catch the malaria, or also, as we call it, the paludismo. And that was in the previous year of the independence, in the year 1820. He got very, very sick. But also we have some natural, let's say, medicines that are very helpful. One of them is the quinina, or quinine. And so important, actually, this medicine is for the history of Peru, for the history of our independence, that in the coat of arms of Peru, we have the tree of the quina, which is the tree from where this medication is made. So this is one of those diseases of that period, which was really devastating, actually, for not just the independentist troops, also the ones brought the independence. And by the way, before I forget to mention, the soldiers that supported the group that wanted to preserve the viceroyalty, the presence of the king, here in this territory, they escaped from the coast and went directly from the Andes. Why they did that? Why they left the capital? Well, seems that it was also related with this disease, because they noticed that in the elevations, this mosquito they did not transmit the disease, or at least they noticed that in the elevations, this disease was not affecting. So that's why also they moved up to the Andes, and that's also one of the reasons why eventually the liberator San Martin was able to get into the capital, into Lima later. So, well, here we are also in front of the image of a famous Peruvian hero, let's say, in this case, hero of the medical field, Daniel Arcedes Carrion. And maybe you remember that at the beginning I was explaining something about the verruga peruana, the Peruvian wart, also called the Carrion Disease. And the story of this gentleman, this very young man, he was in his 20s actually, when he gave his own life, he sacrificed his own life for the science, in a time when, let's say, there was really not well understanding of some diseases, and especially the one of the verruga, which was killing lots of people here in Peru. This was also a very hard time of the history, because we had the war with Chile, the War of the Pacific. Lots of people were dying also during the time of the war. Then we were finally free from that war, but with a terrible economical situation. And also in the previous years, even before of the war, there was, let's say, an explosion, let's say, of this disease, of the verruga peruana in the Andes of Peru. And this happened in the context of the creation of the railroads that were crossing from the coast to the Andes. So there were many people, going to work there to create the railroads, indigenous, sometimes immigrants, and also many Chinese were put to work in the construction of the railroad. And this disease, reappears again. Remember, this is a endemic disease. Also, this idea of the diseases that appear and disappear and only are in one specific location. Well, this is the same case, right? So this disease reappear. And for a long time, people started to believe that it was the Chinese men that were the ones who introduced this disease, because at the end, always the fault was of the Chinese men. And you will see that a little bit later too with all the disease. So basically, this man was trying to understand if this disease was the same one that was has been seen before, this one, the verruga peruana, or was a new different disease. So to understand this and possibly to find, let's say, a cure to this disease, he decided to inoculate this disease in his own arm. And people called him crazy. People said that he was wrong. So he did a very big sacrifice. He sacrificed his own life. He put this disease, he inoculated this disease. He lived for about 3 to 4 months actually with this disease. He had a very, very sad death. But his notes, his experience also help us later to find out the solution and also to find out the cure of this disease. So he is known as a national hero, Daniel Arcedes Carrion, a very promising also life. And there is another case here, and we're talking about the Chinese men, and we have to talk about the bubonic pest, the peste bubonica, the plague. And this plague that came to Peru or reappeared in Peru, because we had some cases before, but this one was very, very bad. It happened in the beginnings of the 20th century, a time also when the hygienismo, a new current pro being clean, pro against, like microbias. It was a new era, a new time. Everybody want to be clean, impeccable. People were eager to try like new cosmetic treatments, some of them made of mercury, some of them made of, things that were very bad for their body. People did not really understand about lots of these, let's say, treatments. They just tried whatever was on sale and advertised, no? And also it was a time of big gaps, big separations between the different social classes we had here in Lima. For example, we still had the descendants of the Spaniards, the light-skinned people. We had the indigenous on one side. We had the mulattoes, the Afro descendants on the other side. And we had the Chinese, which were the descendants of the, or sometimes the very workers from China who came to work in the plantation fields, in the construction of the railroads, and et cetera, picking up of the guano, for example, that were now living in the downtown of Lima, in the center of the city, in the central market of Lima. So they were completely misunderstood. They were considered the outcasts. They spoke differently. They dressed up differently. They had different culinary traditions. Everybody considered them to be strange. And on top of that, dirty, right? So in this period of the hygienismo, the hygienic period of the history of Lima, they were, let's say, accused of every bad thing that could happen, and including, this problem of the bubonic plague, right? So, and that's why also there was in the Chinatown of Lima, there was what we call a callejón, which is a narrow corridor where lots of like little apartments or rooms actually were located, where lots of people used to live there. That place was burned completely. People were evicted from there with no announcement, and that place was burned because it was supposed to be the reason of all of the troubles of Lima. No, they were cursed, they were stigmatized, but they continue here in the city. And look at, for example, this was this is an expert from the newspaper, and this is supposed to be like a let's say comedy, right, of that time, like a meme thing of that time. And it's from the year 1907, in which you can see, well, how people are, let's say, how they used to think the Chinese food, the chifa food, was made of. You can see shoes, rats, bats, etc. All here in this big pot. And so this is one of the many memes from that time made against the Chinese people that live here in Lima. And this is the origin, let's say, of sometimes the fear, right, of towards the Chinese food in this country, which nowadays, of course, we have completely overcome, and we eat a lot of chifa everywhere in the country, no? But this is the early 20th century. By the way, so far we know now after investigations that in reality the bubonic plague did not start with the Chinese. There is a lot of information that points out that it was not connected with them at all, and it came actually from a complete different, let's say, situation. And it might have come also, could be for like in ships that were transporting sort of like a flour, and the first zone in the city of Lima where the plague started was in a mill where there used to be produced different kinds of products, and it was a European person, actually the one that contracted first that disease. It was an immigrant. So yeah, but that's not very publicized. That was not publicized at all back then, and even nowadays. So now the contemporary period, and in the contemporary period also, well, we have some diseases too that affected this territory, of course. But possibly the most famous of all of those diseases was the cholera. The cholera was a disease that affected all Peruvians in the 1990s. And I was very little back then. I don't remember much from that time, but my relatives told me how terrible it was. So the cholera also is a disease that is transmitted from, for example, not cleaning your hands, not washing your hands properly, and having contact with could be feces that have the this let's say bacteria, of the cholera. So this the problem we had in Peru back then in the 1990s is that most Peruvians did not have let's say proper services, such as, for example, running water to their home, bathrooms, like proper bathrooms. About 50% at least of the population of Peru had no running water to their homes. Can you imagine that? So 50% of the population of Peru, no running water. Incredible. It was the 1990s, early 90s. So the story of the starting of the cholera, it's still also a mystery. Well, but the most spread over story about it is that there was a Chinese ship that came to Peru, or at least close to the border of the country, right? And it had people sick with cholera. Tripulants that were sick of cholera. So, well, that when these people, do their necessities in the ship, at the end, well, they sometimes throw, if it's not, a modern ship, the feces to the ocean, right? So the story says that is the way how the fishes along the coast of Peru got the disease. They fed from what was in the sea, the cold water, also the high, like the amount of salt in the water preserve better this bacteria, and the plankton also contaminated from it, and then the fishes contaminated from it, and then later we contaminated from it because we eat a lot of fish here in Peru. It is a little bit strange, not to think that just one ship caused such a breakout of the cholera in the country. But well, it happened. Seems to be like most people believe like that, right? So well, this disease affected the economy of Peru, and by the way, over 300,000 people in the 90s were infected by the cholera, by the disease of the cholera, and almost 3,000 people died from that disease of the cholera of the 90s. So well, but the television, I just remember, the commercials that were recommending everybody to wash their hands, every time they were going to the bathroom. When they were leaving the bathroom, they should wash their hands. So something that, of course, we do now all the time, but back then, there were many people that didn't even have water to wash their hands, right? So it was more difficult to control this. Also, there were people that used to go to the rivers to wash themselves, to drink water. People did not boil the water back then. Really, they did not. They did not boil the water from the top, before drinking. So at the end, everything, was all infected by this disease. So I remember also an interesting story. During that time, President Fujimori, Peruvian Japanese President Fujimori, was the leader of the country, and he was completely against the extreme policy of, let's say, of forbidding Peruvian people to eat fish. Because we primarily eat fish. We are in Peru, so we love to eat fish. We love to eat ceviche. So, but the Ministry of Health of Peru forbid eating fish. So, and that was also very bad, because internationally, nobody wanted to buy our fish. Nobody wanted to buy any product Peruvians produced. So, President Fujimori went out to the streets one day, to a market, and he asked, in a time of prohibition of eating ceviche, he asked for a ceviche, and he asked all of the media to cover this. And so he went to a market and he asked a ceviche, and he ate the ceviche in front of the cameras. So in that way, everybody would see that the fish was healthy. So people started to go back, to eat fish, and then there was a new group of people dying from the disease after that publicity our president tried to do, in order to motivate the consumption of the fish, and it got bad at the end. Anyways, this is a little bit of the history of how the diseases of the history of Peru had changed the direction of the events of this country, how much they have impacted in our society, in the way how we see the world, in the way how nowadays we have dealt with COVID-19, for example. In other parts of the world, COVID-19 has been a very big struggle, like with the people, for example, the regulations. Some people do not like them or do not follow them. Everybody has a context. Everybody has a different reality. I'm not saying this is good or bad, but in Peru, we had so many diseases, so many terrible epidemics, and we are very eager to just follow the indications to avoid, more spread overs, because we know in our history how bad also these diseases can be, and how much can cause also to a nation. And the last one, the 1990s of the cholera, did not happen too long ago. So we still remember it, and we still fear of it. So just let's say to finish with this, some numbers about COVID nowadays in Peru. This is not about COVID, but just to let you know. So officially, in this moment, we know that there were 2 million cases until this moment of people infected with COVID-19 in this country, and about 200,000 people died by COVID-19 until this moment. And well, the good news is about 50% of the population of Peru has the 2 doses of COVID-19 vaccine. So this is very, very positive, and we hope for a better future this time. But Peruvians are ready for anything, and including pandemics. We are ready to fight against them. So, well, thank you so much. I hope you enjoy very much this this lecture, this information I had for you today. And as you know, I am always bringing these topics to the table to discuss. I hope it was helpful also for you to keep digging in history. And for the next lectures, I have 2, let's say, ideas for the next one. One is analyzing this book that is called Inca Cola from Matthew Paris. This is sort of like a book about his experience in Peru. And this is a bestseller, an international bestseller. So this is a friend of mine sent me recently. So I would like to share also my impressions as a Peruvian about, what is in this book, and maybe things that will be really interesting for you to know. So this is one of the future lectures I'm going to be doing also. And the next one is going to be more historic. We're going to be analyzing some of the most important pottery pieces from the famous Larco Museum. So this is the most important private collection we have in Peru. And of course, there are, hundreds, if not thousands of potteries, but I'm going to be selecting for you the most important, the most iconic pieces of the museum, and we're going to be analyzing them together. So, well, these are the upcoming lectures, which I hope you will be interested in joining. And thank you so much for your participation. It is always a pleasure to have you here in my home.